One, two, three. Hello, I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to Monday Night Live and Uncut podcast, where I've had 264 guests so far, all uploaded to YouTube and to the Negotiators podcast. Tonight's guest is Andy Halliday. Andy had more than 30 years as a police firearms officer, and it was in the anti-terrorist squad in the UK. Andy went on almost 3,000 firearms missions protecting us in the UK and also overseas. Andy was also a distinguished hockey player, played for England, and was an international hockey coach. He went to the Olympics over three times, which is fantastic. And he's also raised a lot of money for charity, dribbling a hockey ball from Cardiff to London, which is extraordinary. I hope he didn't do it on the M4 motorway. That's all I can say. Andy, welcome to Monday Night Live. Thanks for joining us. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Andy, tell us a little bit about you becoming a policeman at 19 and patrolling Tottenham, a very dodgy area in London, all on your own.
Long time ago. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Derek. Good evening, everyone. Great to be here. Well, I had a sliding doors moment, not brilliant at school. Three O levels. Those of you that on here that remember O levels, I only got three. Moved on and ended up listening to an advert on Capital Radio in a milk float. Would you believe? I was driving a milk float. Not brilliant. Taking a year out after school. Do you want to play as much sport as you like, earn £22 a week? That was the advert on Capital Radio. I thought that sounded great. And joined the Metropolitan Police. So I did as a cadet back in 1979. That was my sliding doors moment. I walked away 31 years later after a career that I often describe as a painful privilege. I think the ups and downs, the trauma that you get used to facing as a police officer day to day in London, but walked away and it was lucky, very fortunate to have such a brilliant career. So that was how it all started. Ended up out on the beat in Tottenham, Haringey, North London, that sort of area, and beat policing. You don't tend to see a lot of beat policing these days, i.e., you rarely see a copper out on the street. But actually, I was at 19, literally thrown out onto the streets and go out there and learn your stuff. You have a sort of parent constable who looks after you. But once you've done a month or two, that's it. They send you out on the street. So, I mean, part of the fun of policing was that you really didn't know what you were going to face on a day-to-day basis. Not only it made it very interesting, but it also made you learn very, very quickly. And I must admit, over those first few years, I got a lot wrong. We learn from error, but what it does is it gives you this skill base. Now, often we talk about a skill based. It's often a skill where you learn a tool or you learn a machine. But for a police officer, that base is actually all about dealing with conflict and conflict resolution. Learning that the ability to chat can get you out of trouble on many occasions, but it takes a long time to develop those sorts of skills, and you have to deal with a real diverse number of different calls, different situations to get there.
So, Andy, you were on the beat in Tottenham as a young policeman, all on your own. Have you got your helmet there? Everybody wants to see your policeman helmet. If you've
I'm
got
not
it
sure.
there,
I've kept it with me. I
fantastic.
think
That's
I'm
what
not
we want
sure
to see.
whether me
Brilliant.
keeping it is actually theft, but
Oh,
because
okay.
I've obviously now left the police service. But
Andy,
it's a very
this is being recorded, so the um,
it's a proud bit of kit. I was incredibly proud as a beat Bobby to wear that helmet. You don't see that many of them these days. And in fact, going back to the really early days when I joined 1979, 1980. We had, they call them Storno radios, so we could actually talk to each other. But previously to that, we were all issued with a whistle.
Yeah.
And this is going back to sort of the Peelers and Robert Peel, where if you wanted help from another constable, blow your whistle in his direction or her direction 6 times. Um, yeah,
And
but
you were in a pub in Tottenham, weren't you, on your own, facing a punch up between Arsenal and Tottenham supporters in the Swan pub, I think you told me.
yes, the Swan Pub, Tottenham High Road. Of course, it was all started by the Arsenal fans because
Of
the
course.
Tottenham fans would never start it. Um, Pitched
How
up
did you?
there on my own on a match day, first one there, and there are chairs flying across the bar. There's glass breaking, and I am there, and I'm on my own. And people say, well, "What did you do? Did you sort of wade in, sort it out?" No, no, you call for help. You're just like anyone else. There's a degree of fear there, so you wait for the cavalry to arrive to help you out.
Wow. Wow. And then you told me about a situation in Brixton, I think, with three bad guys, three bad guys in a car that you were
Yeah,
facing.
so I mean, we're moving forward quite a few years here, where I was quite used to being in Brixton. Brixton was an area of South London. Some of you may know it, where 1981, massive disorder, the first real disorder that we saw on London streets, and tended to find myself there quite a bit, and it was incredibly frightening in 1981 when that happened. But if you wind the clock forward. And I'd just done a firearms course and become a member of the armed response vehicles. So the Michael Ryan, you may remember that name. He shot and killed, I think it was 17 people in Hungerford in 1987. As a result, they set up the armed response vehicles. And they were a pilot in the Met because we have this very traditional Dixon of Dock Green. For those of you that remember the Beat Bobby on a Saturday night, no, nobody remembers.
Never
Uh,
remember it. No.
yes, good, Paul. Good to see you putting your hand up. Yeah, Dixon of Dock Green was very much the tradition of British policing, and it was all about an unarmed response, knocking on the door, wearing the helmet, and sorting it out. And then knife crime, we've already mentioned a little bit earlier, gun crime was starting to get a bit of a grip on London. So they set up the armed response vehicles, and I did one of the first courses, which threw me out onto the streets carrying a gun. Now, the interesting thing I think about policing and about carrying a gun and decision making is that if you have a baseline of skills as a police officer around dealing with conflict, what you can get away with, the skills, the tactics that you can use. If you carry a gun, all I feel you're doing is you're putting an extra layer, an extra tactic, an extra tool on top of those skills that you already have. Obviously, if you use a firearm, it's likely that you might have to take someone's life, and I think we all accepted that when we did our firearms course. That was mentioned on the very first day. So you accept that that could be an eventuality, and talk it through with your family. It's quite an important facet, I think, of armed policing that you understand that ultimately you can't just put that to one side and get on with it. You've got to understand that that can happen. So I'm sort of carrying my gun on the armed response vehicles. I think it was a Friday or Saturday night, and we get a call that there is basically three guys in a BMW, black BMW, have stolen the car, the BMW, at gunpoint. And that's all the information that we had at this point. So, handgun had been used, car stolen at gunpoint, and disappears. We're in Peckham, South Circular Road, go around towards Brixton on the South Circular Road there, and suddenly we get behind this car. Now, all that's all the information we have. So, from an intelligence perspective, as an armed cop, you've got very, very little. Who's carrying the gun? Is there a gun in there? Um, which one has held the gun to the driver's head, who's stolen the gun, are they all part of it? All this information you're trying to process. And we talk a lot when with armed policing and use of force about an honestly held belief. What you honestly believe as a police officer is really, really important. So as we're driving along, this we get behind this vehicle, and you would expect that it would be toe to the floor, off they go, chase around the South Circular Road, all ending up with gunshots and everything else. No, none of that. The car pulls over to the near side. We pull along behind it. Passenger door opens. Passenger gets out and legs it. I'm out of the car behind, and I'm chasing the guy who's legged it from the car. And I'm getting fair. I was quite fit in those days, and so I managed to sort of stay with him. Now, if you think about that honestly held belief, I don't have a lot of intelligence to go on at this point, so I don't know whether he's carrying a gun. There's probably a gun in the car somewhere, but how much information? It's minimal information. As I'm running along, he turns towards me. I'm getting near, and I'm shouting at him, "Armed police!" I've got my gun out. And it's that confrontational situation, that conflict where I've got to make a decision here. And if I get this wrong, I've got to get this right. And he stops and he turns towards me, and his hand goes into his jacket and he pulls out. And I'm obviously at that point, my finger is on the trigger, and I'm thinking, he pulls out a large bag of cannabis and throws it over the fence. Now, I didn't pull the trigger. And there was something that told me at that point, you're making the right decision. And it's very difficult because I didn't at that point have the backup of loads and loads of armed conflict decisions where I'm actually pointing a gun at somebody and thinking about whether or not I should pull the trigger. I haven't got that to back me up. But what I have got is about 20 years of coppering experience, of policing experience. And it said to me, don't pull the trigger. And I got that right, thankfully.
Wow. So many of us have read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, which is talking about whether the guy in New York did pull the trigger or not. It's sold over 1 million copies, and it was almost something built in instinct, whether you did or you didn't. And I guess your gut feel, your experience gave you a Malcolm Gladwell moment at that point, Andy.
It did. I mean, they call it thin slicing, don't they?
Thin
Where
slicing. Yeah.
your memories, it's the same on a sports pitch. If I'm playing hockey, it's exactly the same. You go through different scenarios time after time after time, and you get this gut feel as to what is right. And they often talk about a copper's sixth sense, and I think that sums it up perfectly. Um, and touch wood. In my career, those nearly 3,000 firearms operations, I was involved in only 5 incidents where shots were fired by police. So it's
Oh,
not a regular occurrence. And that decision making, that pressured decision making on the spot, is certainly based on the amount of experience that you bring to the job,
yeah.
and
Wow.
the dress rehearsal, the visualization. We would often talk about it as a group. We'd talk about those sorts of scenarios together in our team. So yeah, it's not just one of these 1 in a million situations where you've got to make a decision. I think it's based on a very, very strong basis of policing.
Did you wake up in the middle of the night the next night wondering if you what would have happened if you'd pulled the trigger?
Not really. I think you just move on from those situations and think, yeah, I got that right. You pre-morteming, as we used to call it, thinking
Yeah,
about what
yeah,
could happen
yeah.
if you tend to, if you've made the right decision, you tend not to think too much about that.
Yeah.
Although I did have situations where I did, wake up in the middle of the night thinking if I'd done something different. It wasn't necessarily in a firearms
Mm.
situation, but you always ponder, you always go through, debrief we always debrief as a team, but you also individually would debrief every situation yourself so that you can be better next time, particularly if you've made an error.
Yeah, no,
It's all
absolutely.
about learning and getting better.
Well, that's what sport's all about and everything's about. Now, we had our 9/11 moment, didn't we, in the UK, in when some terrorists blew up a bus. I think that was 7/7 in July, and you were on red alert at that stage, I think, and you got involved in the Stockwell situation. Will you share what you can with that? I think you've got a newspaper cutting there as well about it, haven't you? That's
Yes, I have. I won't give the ending away. So,
okay. All right, let's do it your
because
way
if I
round.
show the press cutting, it'll give the ending away.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, 7/7 I think took everybody by surprise, and I'm sure there are people on this call you can remember what you were doing that day. It's one of those iconic moments, a bit like JFK shooting, 9/11. We all remember what we were doing that day. And I remember it specifically because I remember what happened the day before, and that was massive. And when I come back on in a few weeks' time, I'll talk a bit more about that because we were given the Olympic Games. London was given the
Oh,
Olympics on
wow.
the 6th of July. And that night, we were following an Al Qaeda active service unit who were in the country. I can't really go into the details of what they were going to do, but they were in the country. And the following day, obviously 7/7 happened, took us all by surprise. We knew that suicide terrorism, as we call it, was going to come to the streets of London at some point. How it was going to happen, we didn't really know, and we didn't expect um, rucksacks, devices on tubes, on buses. 2 weeks later, I think 56 people died on 7/7. 2 weeks later, the copycat bombers went onto the tubes and a bus, tried to detonate themselves, and the explosive mix in the bombs wasn't quite right. It was TATP, triacetone triperoxide, homemade explosive, and the mix has to be spot on, and it wasn't. Detonators went off, bombs didn't. 7 terrorists on the streets of London, biggest manhunt we've ever seen, and we're at the forefront of it. We were called in the following morning. They'd got a plethora of really strong evidence from these devices. Unlike many other terrorist groups, they didn't cover up what they were doing. So there were identity cards, there's yeah, all sorts of a treasure trove of evidence, which took us down to South London, where we were briefed. And as we were getting into our cars, a subject was spotted coming out of a block of flats in Tulse Hill. Um, Now, there was a sort of link between Scotland Yard, a surveillance team, and us, and we tried to get behind this subject. The idea being that we would detain him. He was suspected to be Hussein Osman, who was one of the bombers from the day before. He was behaving his suspiciously. He got off the bus, onto a bus, off a bus, on a bus. It was very sort of strange behavior. We couldn't detain him on the bus in case he detonated device that it was believed that he was carrying. And cut a long story short, and it is a long story, as I'm sure you can imagine, a lot of intelligence. We ended up entering Stockwell Underground Station, where everything was sort of historic by about 10 or 15 seconds. So, the Assistant Commissioner, Cressida Dick, who was in charge of the operation, I remember her saying, under no circumstances must this man be allowed to get on the tube. And he'd already gone into the underground station at that point. I was in the first car, got across the road, got into the tube station behind some of my colleagues, and we were going down the escalators. And he'd already got to the bottom and was going around the corner. And it was one of those situations. And I vividly remember how I felt that day. I spoke earlier about honestly held belief. My honestly held belief was that I was expecting that this wall of flame was going to come around the corner, that this guy was going to detonate himself. It's almost like if you've got a balloon and you hold a needle to it and you're just waiting for that sort of shock. That was exactly how I felt. And as I get towards the bottom of the escalators, two of my colleagues who were first into the tube, I hear the sound of, well, firecrackers, but I knew it was gunshots. And with that, there's this sort of split second where everything suddenly goes still. And then after about half a second, there are iPods, there are newspapers, there's bags. People are running for their lives. Palpable feeling of tension on the streets of London after what had happened the day before. And people were terrified, absolutely terrified. I then hear another set of gunshots, there's a few seconds between, and then it's absolutely quiet, completely quiet. Everybody's run from the platform, and it's just us, my team, and the subject is lying in the tube. As far as we were concerned, that was Hussein Osman. We had fatally wounded one of the bombers from the day before. And we have a procedure that kicks in at this point, which is all about, it's called post-incident procedure, and it's about welfare, it's about safety, it's about the investigation, accountability, all the things you'd expect after a police shooting. And we then leave the scene. Explosives officers call. We leave the scene and we go back to our police station. We surrender our clothing, we surrender our weapons, and we had a debrief. It was a very fairly quick debrief at this point. Wrote a very quick statement because we were coming back the following day to write all our evidence. When you're involved in a traumatic incident, it takes you 24 hours to process the information. So the idea within this PIP, as we call it, is you write a few notes, you decompress, you disappear, you come back 24 hours later. And we went over to the pub. Now that might sound really flippant. It's not. We all had one pint. We all checked in with each other, how we were all feeling. The two officers, particularly who had pulled the trigger, and I wasn't one of them, but it was really important that we supported them, we supported each other. When we came back in the following morning, and obviously this was massive on the news, all over the news, as you'd expect. And we came back the following day and we were taken upstairs to the top level of our police station where we all sat down around this sort of big wooden table, and a deputy assistant commissioner came in. Had never seen him before, didn't see him afterwards. And he said, "We've called you in to tell you that the man who was fatally wounded yesterday was not Hussein Osman. It was an innocent man by the name of John Charles de Menezes." Now that, when I think about my career and the painful privilege, was probably the lowest moment, and I still think about him. I still think about anybody who was involved, 7/7, 22nd, 21st. I think about my colleagues that pulled the trigger. It was the lowest moment and an incredibly difficult time for all of us. Error. It was down to human error. It was a catalogue of different human errors that led to that situation. And those officers who were the first into the tube had to make a decision. And Derek, you spoke earlier about how you reflect on incidents afterwards. Had those doors closed and they not pulled the trigger and the subject detonated himself in the tube in the tunnel, I just dread to think. It was a very, very difficult situation, and about 3 days later, we talk about error and we talk about blame and blame culture. About 3 days later, this was opposite me on the tube on the way home in the newspaper.
Mm.
And I knew that that day it was a terrible, terrible tragedy, but my colleagues had worked professionally. We did what was expected of us. Tough, tough times. How do you get a team through that sort of situation? A lot of camaraderie, a lot of peer group debriefing, decompression, supporting each other. Tough times. They were tough times, and it's had an impact on my life for some years afterwards. And I ended up missing out on the Rio Olympics
Yeah, we'll come to that in a minute, Andy. Just to remind everybody, a terrorist had exploded a bomb on a Piccadilly line tr tube train just outside King's Cross 2 weeks before that. So there was, and I think you told us already that the commissioner said there's no way that person must get on the tube train, and she came in for a lot of fire after that, didn't she? A
She did,
huge fire.
and but what I would say is that her first concern was the officers that she had sent into the tube. And she showed that by her care, her individual care after the event. She got the Daily Mail parked outside her house for weeks on end. Yet her first consideration was the officers that she had put in that situation. I think that says a lot about leadership,
Yeah,
positive leadership.
absolutely. Absolutely. And years later, Andy, you were the manager of the England hockey team, or the Great Britain hockey team,
Yeah.
and you were advised that you couldn't go to Brazil.
Yeah, ironically, came back. I've sort of thought it was 11 years later. We just qualified for the Olympics. I thought I need to tell the British Olympic Association that I was involved in this, knowing that Jean-Charles de Menezes was Brazilian. Little did I realize that it was that because my name was in the public domain, and that's a whole another day's story. But I ended up, the advice was that I shouldn't go from both a security perspective, but also most importantly, I think a performance perspective. That the team would not be able to perform to their if they knew this sort of threat was hanging over me and them. And I'm thinking, how can I leave my family at home knowing that there is a threat and go away for 3.5 weeks to Brazil? So that decision was taken. It was the right one. Although it felt unjust at the time, it was the right one.
Andy, was there a threat to you, or was it just there was the perceived there might have been a threat?
It's very difficult to know what the truth was. I think that what was intimated to me was that there was a story that had already been written about me coming with the team to Brazil,
Okay.
and the knock-on impact of that was actually that would I be safe? I'd be in the Olympic Village. I probably would be safe, but you can't take that sort of risk.
No, no. We're nearly coming to time's nearly up, Andy. I think you've got your vest, haven't you? There, the protective vest. There. I mean, I
Yeah,
know we'd all like to see it.
well,
Look,
I mean, it
looks like a
looks,
bit of cardboard to
it
me.
does look like a bit of cardboard. This is actually when it's Kevlar. So Kevlar is in body armor, and the strength of body armor is in the number of different layers. So there are 25 layers of Kevlar here. And this was the first body armor I was given back in, goodness me, 1900 and frozen to death. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. But I kept it because one of the reasons I kept it, and I always sort of refer to it, is not because it gave me physical protection for those first few years of my policing career, is that every incident that I was involved with, I was able to deal with the trauma and process it. And it was almost as if my Kevlar became this extra layer of cognitive Kevlar. So the more I dealt with, the more trauma I was involved with day on day, the thicker my Kevlar became. So actually, delivering a death message, for example, which is one of the worst things a police officer can
Oh,
do. When I started doing that, I mean, it was awful, and I didn't get it right. But then at the end of my career, if I had to do the same thing, I was much, much more confident simply because you've gone through those situations time
mm,
after time after
mm.
time.
Wow. Wow. Andy, we are at the end of the interview, and I know you've agreed to come back and talk about your experiences in hockey and leadership and motivation and inspiration, which we're all really interested in, and that's fantastic. But from your policing experience and your leadership experience, have you got one last tip or technique to pass on to people who are live on this broadcast or who might be watching this on YouTube or the Negotiators podcast?
I, the one thing that really stands out, and I think it links in nicely to your newsletter this morning, the amygdala hijack. And I think I would say don't fall for the threat response. Always see the bigger picture. And that would be when I think back to the incidents that I've been involved with as an international sports coach, as a player, as a firearms officer, you've actually got to see the bigger picture. So you've got to take a bit of a step back and see the bigger picture. So that would be it for me. Give yourself that breathing space, whatever it is, to get into that methodical way of thinking to be able to process events rather than thinking on the hoof.
Fantastic. Andy, thanks for joining us. And you were voted UK Hockey Player of the Year. I was hoping to get that award, Andy, when I was playing at St Albans, but it never really happened. Congratulations on that. Thanks for joining Monday Night Live. And can I ask members of Monday Night Live to give you the vote of thanks in the normal way?
Thank you.
Fantastic. So we'll see you back in a few weeks' time. And thanks for joining us. And please stay on for questions. Andy Halliday, that was brilliant.